My first probably 10 to 12 years in prison, all the issues that plagued my life that led to my incarceration, nothing had changed. I was a character. I had a name, I had a gang, I introduced myself that way. When my cell door opened, I'd put on my act. When it closed, I'd go back to Brian James.
My guest today is Brian James, a former inmate who served 29 years in California state prison system.
I'm someone who they call the worst of the worst, who's taken complete advantage of the opportunities that are in there. I took part in the Positive Change Dog program, which was the most transformative 3 months of my entire life.
He'll tell us about his experiences in prison, the violent culture that existed, and how some prison reform policies have opened opportunities for inmates to rehabilitate. He'll share with us his transformation process through rehabilitation programs in the prison that ultimately led to his recent release after 29 years.
I am not at all a proponent of let everybody out of jail. There's people in jail that I'm glad are in jail. They need to be there. I'm a snapshot of change. I took advantage of it. I was dead in the water. Up until about 37 years old, I was gonna die in prison. I had accepted it and I knew I was. They opened the door, I just got a glimmer of hope. Me and a bunch of guys, and we ran with it.
I'm Siyamak. Welcome to California Insider. Brian, it's great to have you on. Welcome.
Thank you, it's an honor.
You have a unique experience. You've been in the prison system as an inmate. We'd love to hear from you. What's going on in the prison systems based on what you have experienced?
Well, today marks 207 days that I've been out. I served 29 years and 2 months. I went in at the age of 16. I was arrested and ultimately convicted of second-degree murder and assault with a great bodily injury. I was tried as an adult. They sent me to adult court along with 5 of my co-defendants, went through the trial system and received 20 years to life. And I entered the prison system. I started in juvenile hall, matriculated up to the county jail and ultimately the prison system. My first probably 10 to 12 years in prison, all the issues that plagued my life that led to my incarceration, nothing had changed. I had actually evolved, trying into a more sophisticated criminal. So I moved up in the criminal world until I realized, until I had my moment, my grandmother died. And this is a common thing in prison. You're sitting here and you're looking at your life. My grandmother, she saw me as a gang member. She saw me in drug addiction, and I knew that something had to change in my life. And that was the moment that I made that change. When I asked for rehabilitation, for the very first time, I went to a documentation hearing. I walked before the parole board. There were 3 commissioners right there. They said, Mr. James, if you get a GED or a high school diploma, if you get a trade, if you stay out of trouble, get some insight into your life. Why did you commit your crime? How did you land in prison today? That's what we expect from you in 20 years as the parole board. I said, sir, if I check all those boxes off right there, what are the chances that I can go home in 20 years? And he laughed at me. He said, your parole officer hasn't even been born yet. So in that moment right there, I immediately made the decision that everything that I need to learn out on the yard are from the other prisoners, the criminal lifestyle, how to survive in prison.
So this was beginning, like when you started.
Yeah.
Because of this interaction, you thought there's no chance for you to get out. So then you need to do that, kind of go in the criminal route, right?
There was no other option. And I was 19 years old at the time. This is a time in CDCR when there was no R at the time, when they would just throw a handball on the yard, a couple basketballs, and say, hey, yard recalls in 5 hours. And people were getting slaughtered. This is what I came into at 18 years old. It was a bloodbath. Murders were the norm. Assaults were the norm. This is a culture that had been building and building. The 3 strikes, they took away the family visiting. A melting pot had been boiling for years inside prison. We hit a point when it seems like in 2012, because I knew I was going to die in prison. They told me that. They effectively said, your parole officer hasn't been born yet. I understood what they meant. And I had never seen anybody parole at that point. Nobody. I seen men who had been in prison since they were teens, hunched over, getting denied for parole board. Hadn't had a write-up in 25 years. They were just not letting people go. I don't know what the change was, but in 2012 and 13, a shift came, and there was a law which I benefited from. It directly fit my situation. It was called Senate Bill 260. It basically looks into the brain science of a child under the age of 25. How can you make rational decisions? Are you going to hold me accountable for a decision I made at 16 for the rest of my life? So I fit into that. And I got to go to the parole board. And by that time, I had already changed my life. I was going to college. I took part in the Positive Change Dog program, which was the most transformative 3 months of my entire life. I walked in the board and they said, Mr. James, this is the easiest decision we've ever made. And they granted my parole. I'm someone who they called the worst of the worst only 7 years earlier. I'm someone who's taken complete advantage of the opportunities that are in there.
So the reforms actually helped you. The rehabilitations are working in a sense based on what you have seen.
Specific brands of rehabilitation, I'm speaking about impactful ones, the Positive Change Dog program. I was on my 25th year in prison when I got the first dog I had ever had in my life. I identified that as nothing less than a spiritual experience. It was unbelievable. It changed me as a human being. Healing dialogue and action, it's restorative justice. They take the offender and they take the victim survivor, whether it be the mother of a murdered victim and a man who had murdered someone before, and they put them together. These groups right here, when you step inside of them and you leave, you will not be the same person again. I sat in front of a lady whose son was murdered from gang violence. I remember when I was walking to meet this lady, I was terrified. I said, I'm in prison for the same crime that took her son. And this woman is gonna sit across from me. I didn't know what was gonna happen. I sat across from me. She shared her story. I shared my story. She said, Brian, what's missing out of your life? I said, I've removed gangs from my life. I've got my addiction under control. I've been clean and sober. At that point, it had been about 5 years. I said, but the fact is, somebody died because of me. A mother had to close the casket on her son because of me. How am I ever gonna forgive myself? This woman stood up and with tears in her eyes, and two other women, they said, we forgive you, Brian. And they put their arms around me. These are the groups, these are the moments that we need. These are the moments that will shift the culture inside prison. But if they're fighting back and they're not letting these people come in, if they're challenging them from coming in, if you're making it difficult, we're gonna continue. It's gonna continue like this. I'm a snapshot of change. I took advantage of it. I was dead in the water. Up until about 37 years old, I was gonna die in prison. I had accepted it and I knew I was. They opened the door, I just got a glimmer of hope. Me and a bunch of guys, and we ran with it. We'd been wanting to for years. We just wanted to learn. I didn't know another way. And I learned in these groups, these outside groups.
The gangs was pretty present in the prison, right?
I mean, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that you land in prison because you're not living the most pro-social lifestyle. So absolutely, I was a gang member in prison. When I made the decision to change my life, and I've seen so many people, I'm not unique in this, I saw overwhelming support. I think a lot of the guys that are still in that lifestyle look like, dang, I would love to do that. That takes a lot of courage. The hardest part for me, I've walked out onto yards before and I've assaulted people. It was way harder for me to walk with my emotional intelligence book and say, hey man, I'm going to group. I'm trying to make it home to my family and change my life. That was hard. But every day it gets easier, and then you discover who you are as a person. I literally discovered who I was as a man through the eyes of that rescue dog in that program.
From what we've heard in the prison system, there is options for rehabilitation, but then there's also the gang side of things. Why is it hard for people to change their path?
The aspect of gangs, people don't change because say, what are they gonna think about me if I change? It's not like the gangs are not gonna say, hey, you're changing, you need to stay with us to commit crime. Surprisingly so, I know a lot of people are gonna be shocked to hear this. They encourage it. They want people to go home. We've been in prison 15, 20, 30, 40, 45 years. We're ready to go home. Everybody's ready to go home. So there is encouragement. The change for me came from, dang, what are they gonna say about me? What are they gonna think about me?
The gang members, right?
Yeah. When they call me a church boy or something like that, am I gonna be able to withstand that? Is my ego still present? but it doesn't come. You get the little ribbing, of course, with any change in any, I think, environment or situation, you're going to get the ribbing, but the ultimate pressure comes from within the person. Or am I going to be able to set aside this? For 20 years, I was a character. I had a name. I had a gang. I introduced myself that way. When my cell door opened, I'd put on my act. When it closed, I'd go back to Brian James. I didn't know who Brian James was. I had been this character for 20 plus years. So I was terrified when I said, I'm going to leave this behind. It almost felt like a funeral to me, like I was putting to rest this person who I was for so many years. It's difficult. It's difficult. That's why when you talk about change or rehabilitation, I'm the one that needs to go into the prisons. A correctional officer is not going to help rehabilitate a person. It has to be me. I'm on the other side of it. I'm the version of you who actually made it to the other side.
Does it feel impossible when you're in that environment of the gangs to make the change? Does it look kind of hopeless? You have to be this way, or?
You almost got to figure out how, because every decision, every observation I make would be through the lens of that gang lifestyle, which I had been indoctrinated and conditioned in my entire life. So I had to relearn. I describe it as a web, just having to untangle so much. I didn't know how to deal with everyday situations because I spent the majority of my life putting my fists through situations, self-medicating. It was all new to me, terrifying, absolutely, but exciting.
For most of us that don't know, what does it mean to be part of gang? What's the mindset? How does it work?
So I'm going to speak for myself. I'm a person at this time who I don't have life skills. I didn't have a father. So the love, acceptance, the lessons, the teaching, I turned to the streets to learn that. In search of love and acceptance, what I found was a gang that accepted me, that brought me in, that told me they love me, that told me this is for life, that anything you need, we got you. So there was nothing that I would not do to maintain and to keep that acceptance. I'd been starving for it. It was missing from my mother and father. So I got jumped in the streets. When I got to prison, it's you replicate that same. You want the love, you want the acceptance, you want to be a part of something. So you do. Now prison, unless you've been there, even if you're there, it's hard to apply some kind of rationale to the way it moves, to the way it works. You take people that are convicted of some of the worst crimes in California and you put them in one big park and you just put a bunch of walls around it. Now there's got to be a law. If there's not a law, what you get is what they have on the SNY yards, which is gangs multiplying, creating multiple gangs. So if there's not a law in prison, people steal, people will go in other people's cell. There's so many things. So politics get put in, and it's basically just to keep the place running. Now, putting your fist in someone's face, stabbings, murders, they're horrendous. Those are horrendous crimes. I don't support that behavior anymore. I have made a commitment to never utilize violence in my life to solve my problems again. But these are the tools that these people use to keep prison in line. Officers as well. If there's a fist fight in the yard, the way an officer breaks up that fist fight is a mini 14 rifle round into the inmate. So when we're talking violence, it's a culture. If an officer is getting assaulted, inmates are getting assaulted just as well. Maybe at a 5-to-1 ratio, possibly.
Folks, you've probably been hearing me talk about Verify for a while now. Verify has been getting a ton of phone calls from you, and I thank you for supporting an investment that actually helps people. A lot of people are talking about this investment, and I like to review the basics with you. First off, yes, it's true. You can earn up to 10.25% fixed rate of return that's not correlated to the stock market or to the Fed. You can turn your income on or off, compounded, whatever you choose, and there are absolutely no fees. There are no restrictions on your principal if you ever need your money back, and you'll get your monthly statement with no surprises. If you are not sure if you can trust this economy, this secure collateralized portfolio may be a very good option for you. Just go to investyrefy.com. That's invest, the letter Y, then refi.com. Folks, I take my endorsements very seriously. If you're looking for a solid investment that helps people, contact my friends at YRefi and then tell them Siyamak Karami sent you. Now let's go back to the interview. So you mentioned some of these reform programs really help you. Can you walk us back to how it happened?
It was amazing. One day I was in the security housing unit in the Corcoran Shoe, and I went out to medical one day, and I seen a friend of mine. He had got arrested at 17. We'd grown up in the system together. He goes, "Hey man, we're going home." So we're going. I've never heard that in my life. I'm not going home. I'm gonna die in prison. They told me that. I said, "What do you mean they're going home?" They said they changed the law for us juveniles. They're letting us all out. As I was walking back from medical, I seen another guy. He said, "Hey, you're going home." No, I said, okay, there's got to be something to this. So I went home. I penned a quick letter to my mom, and she did some investigation, and we discovered this SB 260 law. It was working its way through, the legislative process. Ultimately, 4 months later, Scott Budnick, Elizabeth Calvin, Frankie Carrillo, the juggernauts of prison reform at the time, Javier Starring, walked in and said, "Hey, there's a new law that passed called SB 260. It said it deals with the brain science of juveniles. It said if you were under the age of 18 when you committed your crime, there's no way for you to have the skills in life yet to make that rational decision, to make any decision that the state is going to bind you to for the rest of your life and let you die in prison. But you got to earn your way out." Immersed myself in groups. I got stacks of composition books, me just writing, trying to understand myself. I took all that information, the groups, and I went before board. But without SB 260, I would have never gone home. I'd have been sitting in there right now. With the passing of that came SB 261. They raised the age from 18 to 25. We had SB 29, which was a huge one, dealt with LWOPs. You have kids 14, 15, 16 years old given life without parole sentences. You're telling this 14-year-old kid there's zero redemptive value to you. What's the message?
What was your schedule, day-to-day schedule, when you were going through this process of reforming?
So I signed up for almost every group or possibly could. I would wake up in the morning. I would go to breakfast at 6 o'clock. It would be in the chow hall. I would go to my work assignment after that. I had done things like the last mile computer coding. I had worked in kitchens. But you work your job until 2:30. You get off work, and that's when the groups begin. I go straight to Narcotics Anonymous. From Narcotics Anonymous, I go to Emotional Intelligence. From there, I'll go to Criminal and Gang Members Anonymous. Now, within these groups, I learned my story. I learned the why behind the why. Why they say, "Why did you join a gang?" Because they were out there. There was nothing else to do. It was just in my neighborhood. That's a superficial answer. The board will send you back to your cell for 7 years and tell you to come back and give us the right answer. The right answer is, I didn't have a mom or a dad. They were on drugs. I didn't have love. I didn't have acceptance. I wanted to belong to something. That looked like the perfect family. I saw the movie Colors. It was almost like a commercial for me, an advertisement on why I should. This rap music I'm hearing, they're saying for life, for family, I'll do anything for you. Why would I not join that gang? That's why I joined the gang.
And was it hard to get out of the narcotics? Is there a lot of it in prison?
Yes, there's drugs in prison. There's cell phones in prison. They're there even when visiting is not available. As an addict, you do anything you can to get drugs in. And I did anything I could. I'd had it snuck through the mail. I had a girlfriend come sneak it up before. I was deep in my addiction. There's multiple ways. There's so many officers that have been arrested and walked off facilities for trafficking drugs and phones, prisoners as well. That was the hardest part for me. The gangs, I evolved out of it. I grew out of it. I wanted more in life. It's not what I wanted anymore. The drugs really had a hook in me. Heroin. I was a heroin addict, just like my father was, just like my mother was. And I just hit that point of rock bottom. When my grandmother died, I remember thinking, man, this lady, the love of my life, who sacrificed everything, who has been driving thousands of miles for decades up and down this grapevine. She passed away. And I'm in my addiction. Something's got to change. That was my rock bottom. I was broken spiritually, mentally. And it was in that moment that I saw help.
Is it dangerous not to be part of a gang in a prison? Because it's like there's these movies we see about prison system, and you have to be part of something. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you don't want to be, it's definitely not good to be a freelancer in prison. There's not really no freelancers. California prisons specifically, the way they're organized, when that gate first opened, when I came in at 18, you go find your group and you get in. There's no questions about it. You fall in line and you toe the line from there on out. The culture is different today. People want to go home. I participated in the hunger strike. Every single morning, the officer, great man. Mr. James, would you like your tray? No, sir. He goes, all right. You hanging in there? You all right? Yes, sir. I did that for 46 days. At the end of the 46 days, they gave me a write-up and said I participated in a gang-related incident meant to disrupt the security of the institution. This only highlights your question of gangs today. The gangs today are doing peaceful hunger strikes in prison. We had a peaceful hunger strike, 30,000 people. I don't think there was one act of violence from an inmate towards an officer or free staff directed that way. It was a peaceful hunger strike. In that moment, I said, wow. Because I remember 30 years earlier when they took the family visits, the word on the line was, it's going to be a bloodbath. We're going to start slaughtering people. The family visits, meaning we can't visit with our family and our children. You took away the last hope. And I guess basically put everybody almost at an animal level. The message today, or at least some years back, were let's do a peaceful hunger strike. That's the only way that we're going to, and the request was education. Give us self-help programming. Give us education. We fought for that.
So it's possible for people to change.
Yes, absolutely. And they are. I could probably count just off the top of my head about 30 lifers that are out right now that have done no less than 20 years in prison. Convicted murderers out here thriving in society.
And they're getting jobs, they're contributing.
Been off parole for years, raising their families, contributing to society, giving back.
So we've done some reporting on the Norway model, which California is trying to adopt. And what are your thoughts on it? You're familiar with it, right? What are your thoughts on the Norway model?
I've heard a lot of it. I know the theory. I haven't seen it actually enacted. I've actually talked to people who visited prisons in Norway. So the counter argument is, oh, we're giving the prisoners, we're letting them sit in college dorms, and it's just like they're in school or they're in college. Okay,
well,
so
what Hector told us is that it would be dangerous for the prisoners because then there's different gang members and mixing everybody together, and it's dangerous for the prison guards. What are your thoughts on that?
This is not Russia. There's no Siberia here. These people are coming out of prison back into society. Do you want to have them sit for 20 years in a drab, gray, concrete box and just let them out? Or do you want to replicate something that's real society? I came out here, I've lived my entire life in a room with 2 little spots for me to put my stuff in. So when I come into a room and I see 50 shelves, it's extremely overwhelming. This is just a small thing. You lose things. 30 years, only 2 spots. So if you can create a situation where the actual prisoner is going to step back into, I don't see how that's a bad thing. So if you can create something that makes the transition more comfortable, let's do it, because these people are coming back out. I came back out.
When people come back out, do you think people are reformed based on the programs you went through? Because some people have concern that it could cause problems. Like we've had guests on the show that said, if people come out, then they might cause problems for a society. What are your thoughts on that?
There's definitely people that are going to come out that are going to reoffend. There's no doubt about it. I am not at all a proponent of let everybody out of jail. There's people in jail that I'm glad are in jail. They need to be there. There's people out here that need to be in jail. So I'm definitely not one of them just open the gates and free for all, let everybody out. The majority of people that I'm dealing with, that I talk to, that are coming out of prison, are coming out with good heads on their shoulders and are not reoffending. That's because they traveled the path that I traveled. They took advantage of the program. I got kind of lucky when I got that positive change program. Unfortunately, that program's only in 5 prisons. If you can replicate a positive change program in every prison across California, not only would you empty out the shelters, you would supply an inmate with a dog. And look at the end result. I'm out here doing that work. I'm a trained dog trainer in the $90 billion a year industry. There's jobs for all these guys out here waiting.
Can you tell us more about this program? How did it work?
I was working in the kitchen, freshly out of the security housing unit in Corcoran, about a year out, starving for new information, wanted to feed my soul up with some positive and good. I was just tired of destruction. I looked on the wall and had a picture of a dog, and it said, Marley's Mutt's Positive Change Dog Program. Brian James, K14664, signed my name. About 2 months later, I'm jogging around the track. The founder of the program, Zach Scow, came walking on the yard with a pit bull. So I'm moving across the yard trying to get into his path because I want to see the pit bull. I haven't touched a dog since probably 8 years old. Hello, sir. My name is Brian. I signed up for your program. I would love to be a part of your program. I pet his dog. He said he looked forward to it. About a month later, the dogs came. I did my interview. I got into the program. 7 rescue dogs, 20 inmates. We learned the techniques of dog training. We got a skill. I have an employable skill now. We all got employable skills, but more so we learned work ethic. All the things that I told you why I wanted to join a gang, the love, the acceptance, I got it all from this animal. Unconditional love. I'm a part of the pack of dogs. Every morning he looks up to me. What are we gonna do today? What are we gonna do? It filled me up, and I can't say it enough. It was the most transformative 14 weeks of my entire life. The animal lived with me inside of my cell. And the most beautiful part of the story is our goal was to get these animals adopted. My mother and my sister adopted the dog that I trained. So I got to pour myself into this animal, everything I had into me. And at 25 years in prison, send that home to my family. And then 4 years later, parole, and have that dog at the front door going berserk when I walked in after serving 29 years.
You mentioned you were 16 when this happened. You got into a violent, and can you tell us the story?
I was hanging out with the wrong crowd. I was the wrong crowd. Went to a party. As we were leaving the party, I seen a huge fight breaking out down the road on the street. I jumped out of my car, the car that I was riding in. I reached underneath the seat and I grabbed a knife. I ran over to the scene where the fight was at. Now, it was second nature, almost first nature. I told you I put my fist through everything. This is how I dealt with everything in my life. I took that knife and I swung it as hard as I could, and I hit him. I hit him under his left armpit. In the gang world, that's the ultimate pledge of allegiance. If you're a gang member and you commit that kind of crime, you elevate up. And I'm so ashamed today to say that I was proud in that moment. As sick and twisted as I was as a kid, as a gang member, as a young kid in addiction, I was proud in that moment. Today, it's the reason why I do what I do. For better or worse, I took part in taking that man's life, and our stories are forever intertwined. And I'm not gonna let him die in vain. Everything I do is in honor of him so that he doesn't die in vain.
How long did it take you to go through these programs until, from the moment you decided to change to when you realized you're a new person?
I remember the first group, one of my mentors says, do you have any defects of character? I said, nah, man, I'm a stand-up guy. I pay my bills. If something's got to get done, I do it. And he said, are you a liar? I said, no. Are you selfish? What are you talking about, selfish? I'm not selfish. He started pointing out these things about myself that I had no idea about. I didn't realize it. My whole life, I dragged my family through court cases, arrests, and all the while I told myself, I'm a tough guy, I can handle this. Me. Not looking at the fact that I'm dragging my family along with me. My family did all 29 years in prison with me, with the exception of sitting in the cell. And that right there is something I'm not going to repeat. I'm not going to do that to my family again. Unacceptable.
When was the first time you got in front of the parole board?
So the first time I went to the parole board was actually when I was in the Corcoran Security Housing Unit. That was 2014 or 15. I
So you had been in there for like almost 15 years?
At that point, 15, 17 years. I went in there. They go through the series of asking the questions. I hadn't done any meaningful work in my life. There was no change going on. It was me going in there as a gang member, trying to be manipulative. They saw straight through it, and they gave me a 7-year denial, and that rocked my world right there.
And were you a gang member? Was it?
So I was at a weird place in my life where my grandmother had died. I had made the change in my head. I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't know how to get there. I would tell myself things like, I won't stab anybody ever again, but I'll hold the knife if they need. I'll just hold it for them. That's good. I'm a good person for that. I was rationalizing. This is me and my growth. We talked about.
Hold the knife for.
Well, yeah, like.
If there's an issue.
Well, weapons are held. Weapons are all over prison. And people hold them. And people are responsible for holding them. So I would tell myself, never will I use it, but I'll only hold it. As if that was okay. You know, this is just me evolving as a human being. And then I got caught with that. And I says, now I got to call my mom and tell her that I got caught with a weapon. I just told her I changed because of grandma. These are my epiphanies that I continue to have over and over until I hit my next parole board. By that time, I had been immersed in groups for years. I'm a completely different human being. I define myself by compassion and service and love. The complete 180 of what I was before, and I went before the parole board, and it was just a conversation. It wasn't me defending myself. They says, "Why are you here today?" My answer 7 years before was because I got arrested for a crime, and this is my parole date. As opposed to me with the insight now, I'm here because a man lost his life, and I'm responsible for it. And I want to share with you guys how sorry I am, how remorseful I am for what I've done. And I want to tell you the things that I've done to try my best to show you that I'm not that person anymore and to make amends to that man who lost his life. He was 18 years old at the time. I was 16. So they began to ask me a series of questions. And it was basically them asking me things that I had already been caught for, or they had received information that I had done. Were you bringing drugs in the mail when you were in Pelican Bay State Prison? Yes, sir, I was. Were you involved in this incident over here? Yes, sir, I was. They wanted to make sure that I'm owning my responsibility for what I did. I was there to lay it all on the table. Whether I was going to go home or not had no bearing on what I was going to say, who I was as a person. This is who I was. So for me, it was a moment to show my remorse, my responsibility, and my insight, and make amends on record to the state of California for the crime that I committed. And in the process, I had an amazing conversation with these two commissioners. They asked questions, I answered them, and in the end, they says, "Go step out, we're going to deliberate." I stepped out and I set my folder down. I took a drink of water. As soon as I drank the water, the door opened back up. They said, "They're ready for you." I said, "This ain't good." And when I sat down, they go through the legalities of it, and then he said, "Mr. James, this is the easiest decision I've ever made." And I lost it. I don't remember anything since. I just remember I just wanted to get back to that day room and call my mom and say it's over.
And how long was it till after that you got it? How long ago was that?
When I got released after the hearing. So when you go to a parole board hearing, once they do give you a grant of suitability, grant your parole. It's 120 days for them to review that decision. Once they've done that, they move it over to the desk of the governor. It sits there on Gavin Newsom's desk for 30 days. He can either affirm, reject, or take no action. Of course, he'll take no action, understandably so. But he has rejected some before, but no action was taken. So on day 121, after that, the counselor called me in and said, Mr. James, you're going home Friday. Unbelievable. My door popped at 6 in the morning. I was at receiving and release. I was out of there by 9. My mom was in the parking lot, jumped in the car and drove home. Everything I owned. 46-year-old man holding it right here. Starting my life fresh. So I get these people out here that you got to work this job, you got to do this to make it in California. I'm a 47-year-old man who just got his driver's license, who has his first job. Everything is new for me. I ate clams for the first time last week. It's all about perspective. It's all about perspective.
Do you have any thought for Californians?
To be honest, today marks 207 days out. I'm gathering information myself in life right now. A lot of people ask my opinions on things. I don't think I have enough information. I'm qualified enough to give specific, like how to fix problems. I got a ton of ideas like everybody, but it's in terms of anything of like solid value. The thing that most struck out to me was this. I hear so much about California and it's run down and negative. In my time out of prison, I've had the greatest experiences. I've met some amazing people. I've gotten help from people. So I guess you got to really look for this ugly society, because the one that I'm living in is amazing.
Brian James, dog trainer and mentor and former inmate. It was great to have you on California Insider.
Thank you so much.
If you haven't checked out californiainsider.com, we highly recommend you do that now, because we're going to have a lot of news and videos there. And on top of what we have there right now, we are building a really big platform to cover what's happening in California, so you can be informed. We're going to have more shows, more videos from all aspects of life in California. Go to californiainsider.com and we'll see you there.